It was the quiet hum of space that made the Crithari feel at home. Their warship, the Karath, glided effortlessly through the cold darkness of the galaxy, always in search of its next mission. The crew of the Karath was ruthless, known for their cruelty in hunting down rare species for the highest bidder. Yet, they had never encountered a creature quite like the one they now held in their grasp. A small human escape pod drifted toward them, its signal faint but enough to be detected by the Karath's advanced sensors. The pod was an odd sight, a tiny, fragile thing, far too small and unarmed to be of any real importance. It wasn't a military vessel, nor was it something the Crithari had ever seen before. The ship's distress beacon was still active, a soft, flashing light that meant someone inside needed help. "Looks like we found something easy," grunted Zokar, the ship's captain, a tall and imposing figure with deep blue skin. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the small vessel on his screen. A human. No defenses. They'll make an easy prize. The crew gathered around, sneering at the idea of taking the human alive. To the Crithari, humans were nothing more than another weak species to be captured. They had dealt with many before, species that could be sold for a high price in the black markets of the galaxy. But a human child. That was even better. There was no telling how much this one could fetch. "Prepare the tractor beam," Zokar ordered. His voice echoed through the ship's control room, cold and commanding. "Let's see what this human has to offer." Moments later, the escape pod was pulled into the Karath's cargo hold. The doors opened with a hiss, revealing a small human child, no more than 8 years old. The child lay unconscious on the floor of the pod, a thin blanket wrapped around them for warmth. Their face was pale, eyes closed, and they appeared to be breathing heavily. Zokar stepped forward, his long, clawed hands reaching down to lift the child. He sneered at the fragile form, not even considering the possibility of any threat. To him, the child was nothing more than a helpless victim, a perfect prize for their next transaction. He turned to his first officer, a sharp-eyed Crithari named Kexna. "Get a medical team to check the kid. Then get them ready for transport." As Kexna nodded, Zokar inspected the pod more closely. There was something strange about it. No markings, no signs of any official insignia, just the basic design of a civilian escape pod. It wasn't unusual for a ship to break down and send a distress signal, but the fact that this one had been drifting for so long caught Zokar's attention. "Doesn't matter," he muttered to himself. "It's just a child." The Crithari were used to dealing with conquered species, always treating their captives with disdain and carelessness. But this one, this human child, was something they hadn't expected. They had no idea what humans were capable of. All they saw was an opportunity. Zokar gave the order to transport the child to the holding cells, where they would be placed with the other prisoners until the Crithari could figure out what to do with them. The child's fate seemed sealed, a quiet and unnoticed life ahead as part of a future trade. But as the child was carried away, something unusual happened. The child stirred. A soft, barely audible sound escaped from the child's lips, but Zokar dismissed it. "Whatever," he said, waving it off. "Get them in the cell." The Crithari didn't know it yet, but this child was not just any ordinary human. Their presence would soon become the trigger for something far greater than any of the Crithari could imagine. Inside the cell, the child remained still for a moment, the faint beeping of the ship's systems ringing in their ears. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the fact that they were trapped aboard a ruthless alien warship, the child didn't cry. They didn't scream or beg. Instead, they closed their eyes and whispered quietly to themselves. In the darkness of the cell, the child smiled faintly, as if they knew something the Crithari did not, something that would soon change the course of this journey. Admiral Cole stared at the blinking screen in front of him. The room was dim, filled with the quiet hum of the control systems aboard the Hindle, Earth's most secretive and powerful ship. The Admiral's fingers hovered over the keys, his mind racing. He had seen the alert, and it was troubling. A single human child, lost in space. A tiny escape pod drifting aimlessly, sending out a distress signal. At first, it seemed like a minor issue, perhaps just another mistake in space. A pod accidentally launched or a lost ship. But then he looked closer at the coordinates and the message that had come with the signal. Something about it felt different. The ship was in a region of space that wasn't often traveled, far from the typical routes humans used. The child aboard the pod wasn't just anyone. And this wasn't just a random distress call. The child's name flashed briefly on the screen, an innocuous and simple name, Ethan Miller, but it meant everything to Cole. Ethan Miller wasn't some ordinary child. His father was one of Earth's top military tacticians, a man who had created many of the strategies that kept Earth safe from alien threats. Ethan was a child of importance, even if the galaxy didn't yet know it. Admiral. The calm voice broke through his thoughts. It was Lieutenant Juno, his right-hand officer, standing at attention. We've confirmed the distress signal. It's coming from a Crithuri ship, the Karath. They're holding the child on board. Cole's face hardened. The Crithuri were a ruthless and powerful alien species, known for enslaving weaker beings and trading them across the galaxy. They were feared across many star systems, and they had no idea what they had just gotten themselves into. Are we sure? Cole asked, his voice steady but sharp. He knew that the Crithuri wouldn't have come for a child unless they had been tracking the escape pod for a while. And that meant they knew something the human military didn't. It was time to act. Positive, sir, Juno replied. We've intercepted their communications. They've already started moving the child to their holding cells. Cole leaned forward, his mind calculating the next move. He had never been one to act impulsively. But the situation had changed. The child's life was at stake, and Earth's hidden fleet, the human armada, was ready for such moments. The Crithuri would not get away with this. Prepare the fleet, Cole ordered. I want a full strike force ready to go within the hour. We'll take them by surprise. They'll never know what hit them. In a flash, the crew of the Heimdall sprang into action. The hidden armada was not a force to be underestimated. Over the years, the fleet had been carefully built and kept secret from the galaxy. Earth had long known that it wasn't just their blue skies that needed protection. It was their future, their children, their lives. And if anyone thought they could threaten a single child, they would soon learn just how dangerous that was. As Cole activated the fleet's command system, his thoughts turned to the Crithuri. They had made a huge mistake. They thought that humans were weak. They thought that the small, fragile beings they had encountered in the past were nothing more than easy prey. But Cole knew better. The Crithuri didn't understand humanity. They didn't know what would happen when Earth's hidden armada rose from the shadows. Lieutenant, send a message to the rest of the fleet, Cole said. We're not just going in to rescue the child. We're sending a message to the galaxy. This will be an example. Juno nodded and quickly typed in the orders. The message went out across the galaxy, reaching every fleet, every station, and every system that had the technology to listen. A simple but chilling message. Return the child. Surrender the fleet, or be erased. Back on the Crithuri ship, the crew had no idea what was coming. They were still laughing at their good fortune, still believing that the child was nothing but an easy prize. Their ship, the Karath, was massive. An advanced warship armed with enough firepower to take down entire fleets. They had no reason to think they would be anything but victorious. But as they moved through space, their arrogance blinded them. They were about to learn that no one, no matter how strong, could take a human child and get away with it. The Crithuri had no idea what was coming. They were busy celebrating their easy capture, the child locked in a cell, helpless, unaware of the storm that was building in the stars. On the Karath, everything seemed calm, even as they sped toward the trade route where they planned to sell the human child to the highest bidder. Captain Zokar walked the halls of the warship, his boots echoing off the cold metal floors. The crew moved swiftly, their task almost complete. They had captured the child, and now they were only days away from reaching the trading post, where they would receive a hefty sum for their prize. It was business as usual for the Crithari. They had done this many times before. However, something was off. The ship's sensors began picking up strange readings, signals that didn't belong in the quiet space around them. A faint flicker on the radar, something that didn't make sense. Zokar dismissed it at first. There was no reason to worry. The area they were in had been long considered empty of any significant threats. But then, the readings grew stronger. Closer. Zokar paused. His keen eyes narrowed. The strange signals were coming from behind them. Something was tailing them. "Get me a full scan of the area," Zokar barked, his calm demeanor faltering for the first time. His crew scrambled to obey, but there was something unsettling about the readings they were picking up. Then, without warning, the alarms on the Karath blared, echoing through the ship's corridors. The crew rushed to their posts, but the sense of panic was clear. This was not a drill. "We've got incoming," shouted Kexna, the first officer, her voice sharp with urgency. The ship shook as if something massive had just impacted it. The Crithari warship was powerful, but the force of the impact was so great that even it faltered under the pressure. Zokar's hand gripped the nearest console, steadying himself. "What in the stars is happening?" Zokar growled. His voice was tinged with fear. From the viewports of the Karath, they saw it, an enormous shadow appearing from the depths of space. The blackness of the void was suddenly broken by the outline of an enormous fleet, each ship more massive than the next. The ships were sleek, powerful, with human-made markings that the Crithari had never seen before. It was a fleet unlike anything they had ever encountered. "We're being surrounded," Kexna yelled. The ships were everywhere. The Crithari had nowhere to run. They tried to send out a distress signal, but the message was intercepted before it even left their communication systems. "It's them," Zokar muttered under his breath. "The humans." No one on the Karath had ever seen the human armada before. The fleet had been kept a secret, hidden away from the rest of the galaxy for years. No one had known just how powerful Earth's military had become. But now, the Crithari would know. The human armada was here, and it was not a fleet to be underestimated. Zokar turned to Kexna. "Get the child ready for transport. We'll need to abandon the ship if we don't act fast." But Kexna wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the massive human ships, each one moving with incredible precision, their weapons primed and ready. They were about to strike. "Captain," Kexna whispered, her voice trembling, "this isn't just a rescue mission. It's an attack." Zokar's heart sank. He had underestimated the humans. He had thought that the child was nothing more than a weak, helpless being. But now, with the fleet closing in, it was clear that the humans had something much greater in mind. "Prepare the weapons," Zokar ordered, trying to mask his growing fear. "We'll fight back." But even as he gave the command, he knew it was too late. The human armada had already surrounded them. Their ships were too fast, too powerful. The Crithari warship was already outmatched. Suddenly, the quiet hum of the Karath's engines was drowned out by the loud roar of energy blasts. The Crithari ship rocked violently as a barrage of missiles and laser fire slammed into its hull. The shields flickered but quickly failed under the intense pressure. The Karath's once proud exterior began to crumble under the relentless assault. Zokar's eyes widened in disbelief. "This is impossible," he shouted, gripping the command chair as the ship shook again. The human fleet moved in perfect coordination, their ships launching a synchronized attack that tore through the Crithari warship's defenses. Zokar's crew scrambled, trying desperately to return fire, but the human ships were already too close. And then, in the chaos of battle, Zokar's comm panel lit up with a single, chilling message. "Surrender the child. Return what you've taken, or face extinction." It was a simple message, but it was enough to make Zokar's blood run cold. He knew it was the end. The Critheri had made a deadly mistake. The battle raged on as the Critheri warship, the Karath, shook under the intense barrage of human firepower. Zokar's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, any plan that might save his crew and his ship. But it was clear now. The human armada was too strong, and the Critheri were outmatched. On the bridge of the Karath, the crew worked frantically, desperately trying to fire back at the human ships surrounding them. The shields were failing, and the weapon systems were slowly being destroyed, piece by piece. There was no escape. "Captain, the forward shields are down," Kexna shouted, her voice strained with panic. "We can't hold them off much longer." Zokar clenched his fists. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Critheri had always been the ones in control, always the ones who dictated the terms of war. They were feared throughout the galaxy. But now, they were the ones on the receiving end of the most terrifying force they had ever encountered. Outside the ship, the human fleet closed in, their ships moving with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. The Critheri had never seen anything like it. The human ships didn't just fight. They fought as one. Every movement, every strike, was coordinated and deliberate. It was as if the entire fleet shared a single mind, a single goal. Zokar had never been afraid of battle. He had faced down enemies far more powerful than himself, and he had always emerged victorious. But this was different. This was no ordinary enemy. This was humanity, a species that had once been seen as weak, vulnerable, and insignificant. And yet, here they were, fighting with a strength and unity that the Critheri had never anticipated. "Captain, we've lost all communication with the fleet," Kexna said, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "They're going to destroy us." Zokar turned to face her, his face pale. He had to do something, but his options were running out. "Send a message," he ordered, his voice low but steady. "Tell the humans we surrender. We'll release the child. We won't resist anymore." Kexna hesitated for a moment before complying. She sent the message, a final plea for mercy, hoping that perhaps the humans would show some restraint. But even as she sent the message, a deep part of her knew it was too late. The human fleet didn't stop. They didn't slow down. The message was ignored, and the attacks continued, relentless and unyielding. Meanwhile, on the Hindle, Admiral Cole watched the battle unfold from the command center. He had given the order to destroy the Karath if necessary, but part of him hoped it wouldn't come to that. The situation was clear now. The Critheri had made their choice, and now they had to face the consequences. "We'll give them one more chance," Admiral Cole said, his voice firm. "Send a message. Tell them we will not stop until the child is safe. If they want mercy, they need to surrender immediately." The message was sent, and once again it reached the Karath. Zokar stood at the front of the bridge, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't know what to do. The Critheri had always been a species of pride, and surrender was a concept foreign to them. But there was no choice now. "We're losing control," Kexna said. "The engines are failing. We're losing power across the ship." Zokar took a deep breath. There was no escaping this. No more fighting. He could feel the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. The warship was collapsing, and the human fleet had shown no mercy. The only chance now was to comply. He turned to his crew. "Prepare to abandon ship. We'll evacuate and make contact with the humans." As the crew began to make preparations, Zokar stood by the viewport, staring out at the approaching human ships. Their relentless advance felt like the closing of a door, the final step in a journey that the Critheri had started but could not finish. "Release the child," Zokar ordered. His voice was a whisper now, almost lost in the noise of the ship's destruction. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. The human fleet wasn't going to let this go. They had made their point, and they had made it with terrifying clarity. Meanwhile, aboard the Hindle, Admiral Cole watched as the Critheri warship began to fall apart. He saw the message from Zokar and nodded grimly. The Critheri had made the right choice, but it wasn't enough. They would learn that humanity didn't just fight for survival. They fought for each other. "Prepare for recovery," Cole said, his voice calm. "The child will be safe soon, and the Critheri will know that Earth is not to be underestimated." As the final shots were fired and the Karath began to crumble, the message was clear. Humanity had arrived, and no one was going to threaten their future again. As the dust of battle settled, the Critheri warship, Karath, drifted in space, its once proud hull now a lifeless hulk. The human ships had done their job, disabling the enemy vessel with precision, but they did not destroy it. They had a different plan, one that involved more than just victory on the battlefield. Inside the command center of the Heimdall, Admiral Cole looked out over the wreckage of the Karath. The crew around him was tense, their hands still moving over the control panels, watching for any signs of further threat. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. There was one final task to complete: the rescue of the human child. The child had been the reason for this entire conflict. They had been the one thing that brought the might of the human armada to the Critheri's doorstep. And now, with the warship disabled, the child was no longer in danger. But that didn't mean the mission was over. "Send the recovery team," Cole ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We need to bring the child back." Down on the surface of the Karath, the Critheri had already begun their retreat. Zokar, the captain of the defeated ship, watched as his crew gathered their belongings, preparing to board the escape pods. The warship was done, and they would have to find a new way to survive. But something about the whole situation gnawed at Zokar. He had fought many battles, but this was unlike any other. The human fleet was not just a force to be reckoned with. It was a symbol of what humanity could accomplish when they worked together. Zokar turned to Kexna, his first officer, and his voice was heavy with regret. "We were foolish. We thought we could capture a human child, use them for profit. But we underestimated them." Kexna nodded, her expression grim. "They're not just a race to be exploited. They're different. We saw it in the way they fought, in the way they protected what was theirs. They would die for each other." "We should have known," Zokar muttered. "But we didn't. Now we must face the consequences." Just then, a Critheri officer entered the room, bringing news that Zokar had been dreading. "Captain, the humans are approaching. They've sent a delegation." Zokar's heart sank. The humans were coming, but what would they want? Would they offer mercy, or would they exact punishment for the damage the Critheri had caused? He couldn't tell. As the humans boarded the Karath, they were met by a group of Critheri officers who stood in silence, unsure of what to say or do. They were beaten, their pride shattered. But they knew they had no choice but to face the consequences. Admiral Cole led the human delegation, his expression steady. Behind him, several armed soldiers kept a watchful eye, but there was no aggression in their stance. They weren't here for more fighting. They were here for something else. Zokar stepped forward, his voice low. "You have us at your mercy. We were wrong. We made a mistake. Please, take the child and let us go. We won't cause any more trouble." Cole's eyes studied the Critheri captain carefully. He had expected the usual arrogance, the same defiance that the Critheri were known for. But instead, he saw something different. Zokar's posture was not that of a warrior ready for another fight. It was that of someone who knew they had lost, and who was prepared to make amends. "Your surrender is noted," Cole said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But this is not about punishment. This is about peace. The child you captured is not just any human. They are a symbol of our future. Our future is built on unity, and that's what we want to offer." Zokar looked confused. "Peace? After all this, you want peace with us?" "We do," Cole said, nodding. "The human child was taken, but they were never meant to be a prize or a weapon. You've seen what we can do when we come together. We don't seek vengeance, we seek understanding." Zokar didn't know how to respond. This was not the way he had expected the encounter to go. The Critheri had always believed in power and fear, but these humans, these Earthlings, were offering something entirely different. They were offering a chance to rebuild, a chance for cooperation. "You're offering us peace?" Zokar asked, his voice uncertain. "After everything we've done?" Cole's gaze softened. "Yes. But understand this. The time for exploitation and war is over. You will need to prove that you're willing to change. That's the first step." Zokar felt the weight of those words. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but perhaps, just perhaps, the future he had imagined for the Critheri could still be salvaged. There was a long road ahead, one filled with hard choices and uncertain outcomes, but it was a road that would lead to something greater, something better. "Thank you," Zokar said quietly, his voice filled with the quiet realization of just how far he had come in a short time. "We will prove that we can change." And so, as the human child was safely escorted off the Karath, a new chapter in the galaxy's history began. The war was over, and now, a new alliance was being formed. One where understanding, cooperation, and the shared will to survive would be the foundation for a better future. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy felt different. The warships of the Critheri had been disabled, and the human armada stood victorious. But victory for Admiral Cole didn't feel like a cause for celebration. It felt like the beginning of something bigger, something that could change the entire galaxy. Back on Earth, the leaders of the Human Council gathered in a secure room, discussing the next steps in their new mission. The Critheri had surrendered, but the real question was what would happen now. Could they truly build a lasting peace? Could they offer the Critheri a future without fear, without war? Admiral Cole sat at the head of the table, his fingers pressed together as he listened to the various arguments. Some of the leaders were cautious, unsure if the Critheri could be trusted after so much damage had been done. Others, however, were more optimistic, believing that the Critheri could change if given the opportunity. "We can't just let this go," one of the council members said, her voice filled with urgency. "The Critheri have caused enough harm across the galaxy. They cannot be trusted." But Admiral Cole shook his head. "We've seen what they're capable of, yes. But we've also seen something else. We've seen their willingness to change. We've seen the captain of the Karath, Zokar, admit his mistakes. That's not something we can ignore." He paused, letting the words settle in the room. "We are not here to punish. We are here to help guide the Critheri into a new path, a path of peace. The galaxy doesn't need more enemies. It needs allies." There was silence for a moment. Then, one of the council members spoke up again. "But how do we know they won't turn on us the moment we lower our guard? How do we know they truly want peace?" "We don't know for sure," Cole replied. "But we can give them the chance. We'll monitor them closely, of course. But we can't build a future by holding on to the past. We have to take risks if we want a better tomorrow." The council fell quiet once more, and after a few minutes, the members slowly began to nod in agreement. They knew Admiral Cole was right. The decision to offer peace was not without risk, but it was the only way forward. A galaxy of conflict would never lead to progress, but a galaxy of cooperation, that was a future worth fighting for. Meanwhile, aboard the Heimdall, Zokar and his crew had been taken aboard the human ship, where they were treated with surprising respect. The humans had not confined them to cells or treated them as prisoners. Instead, they had been given clean quarters and given time to reflect on their actions. The atmosphere aboard the ship was one of cautious optimism. There were still questions, still doubts, but there was also something new: hope. Zokar stood on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. It was strange to be aboard a human ship, but even stranger was the sense of peace that seemed to fill the air. The humans had shown mercy, and now he had to prove that the Critheri were capable of earning that mercy. He wasn't sure where the future would take them. He didn't know if the Critheri people would accept the path of peace, but for the first time, Zokar allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where his people could learn, grow, and perhaps even one day work alongside the humans. Captain. Kexna's voice interrupted his thoughts. She stood beside him, her expression thoughtful. What happens now? Zokar turned to face her. Now we wait. We show them that we can change. We show them that we're willing to build something better. Kexna nodded, but Zokar could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't the only one feeling this way. The Kritheri had always believed in strength, in power. To ask them to embrace peace, to turn away from the old ways, was a difficult task, but it was one they had to face. Meanwhile, the human child who had been the center of the conflict was now safe. They had been returned to Earth, where they were greeted as a hero. The humans had not just saved the child, they had saved the possibility of a better future, a future where peace was more than just a dream. The child's return was symbolic, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. It was a reminder that no matter how far apart species might seem, they could always find common ground. The child's safety was proof that humanity, and perhaps even the Krithari, could learn to live together in peace. As Zokar looked out at the stars once more, he felt a shift within him. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also full of possibility. For the first time, he truly understood what the humans had been fighting for. It wasn't just for survival, it was for a better world, a world where unity was the key to strength. Zokar took a deep breath and turned to Kexna. This is just the beginning. We'll have to work hard. We'll have to earn the trust of the humans and show the galaxy that we are capable of something greater. Kexna smiled faintly. A new beginning, Captain. Zokar nodded. Yes, a new beginning. And so, as the Heimdall and the remaining Krithari forces began their journey back to Earth, the future remained uncertain. But there was hope. And hope, Zokar knew, was the first step towards something better. The galaxy had changed. It wasn't just the outcome of a single battle or the defeat of a once powerful foe. It was the birth of something new. A new beginning, where past enemies could work together for a brighter future. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the Heimdall, staring out at the stars. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. After all the battles, the pain, and the losses, peace was finally within reach. It had taken everything. The sacrifices of countless brave soldiers, the determination of both humans and the Kritheri, to get to this point. But it wasn't just about defeating an enemy anymore. It was about building something that could last. A future where old grudges were set aside in favor of cooperation. Across the galaxy, leaders from many different species had gathered. They were meeting in a council chamber, a new space formed by representatives of humans, Krithari, and other species who had witnessed the struggle for peace. The air in the room was heavy with anticipation. The decisions made here would shape the future of the entire galaxy. Admiral Cole entered the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the large hall. He was met by leaders from various species, some familiar, others new, all waiting for his words. He stepped up to the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces before him. Each one held hope, but also skepticism. Trust was something that had to be earned. "We've all seen what war can do," Cole began, his voice steady. "We've all felt its pain, its loss. But we have an opportunity now to build something better. A future where we don't have to fight to survive. A future where we work together." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. The Kritheri are ready to take the first step toward peace. Zokar, their captain, has shown us that they are willing to change. They are not the same as they once were, and it's not just about them. Every species in this galaxy has the chance to embrace this new way. But it will take all of us. We must support one another, or we risk falling back into the same cycle of destruction. A representative from the Androsians, a species known for their wisdom and diplomacy, stood. "Admiral Cole, you speak of unity, but unity is not easy to achieve. We've been enemies for centuries. How can we trust the Kritheri to keep their word? How can we be sure they are truly ready for peace? Cole met the Androsians' gaze, understanding the skepticism in their voice. I know it's not easy. Trust is hard to build, especially after so much blood has been spilled. But we have to start somewhere. If we want to ensure that this galaxy has a future, we must take that first step together. A few others in the room nodded in agreement, and soon the discussion grew more open, though not without heated debates. But the seeds of hope had already been planted, and one by one, they began to realize that the future was not just about old grudges. It was about creating a place where everyone could live in peace. Meanwhile, aboard the Heimdall, Zokar stood in front of the Crithari crew, many of whom had once fought bitterly against the humans. Now, they were silent, unsure of what to make of the new order in the galaxy. "We're not asking for forgiveness," Zokar said to his crew. "What we're asking for is a chance to rebuild, to stand alongside the humans, not as their enemies, but as their allies." The crew looked at one another, the words sinking in. It wasn't easy. They had grown up in a culture that celebrated strength and dominance. To change that mindset, to embrace peace, was a monumental shift. But Zokar believed it was the right path forward. "We have the opportunity to be part of something greater than ourselves," Zokar continued, "and we must take that opportunity for the sake of our future." Outside, the stars twinkled peacefully, as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. The peace between the humans and the Crithari was fragile, but it was real. And it was the beginning of a new chapter for the galaxy. Admiral Cole stood in front of the gathered council members, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. The Crithari had agreed to work alongside the humans. The peace talks were just the beginning, but already the signs were there. They were on the right path. "We have made history," Cole said, "but this is just the beginning. We now have the responsibility to ensure that the future we create is one of unity, not division." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the leaders who had once been enemies. "We will build this future together. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it." As the council members rose from their seats, there was a quiet sense of optimism in the air. The galaxy had been through so much, but now there was hope. Hope that peace was possible. Hope that even the darkest pasts could be forgiven. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, the galaxy was united in the belief that it was worth fighting for.